Hi everyone, welcome to Module 3. We're going to be talking this week about diversity and inclusion, and this video, as well as the one immediately following it, is a welcome to this topic. We want to make sure that you know that as we engage in any exchange around this topic, we do recognize that it's a tender topic for people. We live in a culture where our history has made this topic tender. We have probably all experienced some kinds of clashes and painful exchanges with people around the topic of inclusion and all the isms related to it. So we want you to know that we will engage with you in a spirit of great generosity and radical respect. As per Amanda Adichie's video on the danger of a single story, we understand that each of us holds only a small piece of the truth, and that throughout our lifetimes we'll be living into questions and answers about how best to create welcoming climates for students and hold high expectations for each other and our students. So why this topic? Well, Edgewood has been conducting surveys for students, faculty, and staff for several years now around the topic of inclusion, and we've made great strides. At the same time, we know that we are not where we want to be, and that we have a lot to learn still. So one of the things that we have done is looked at the results of that most recent campus climate survey, and in the area of faculty development, we're working to try to address the things that students have told us in particular, and faculty and staff, about how they could be more fully welcomed into our courses. So one of the things that we have learned over time is often referred to as the iceberg of culture. You can see that the things on the surface of the iceberg are very visual. You can prove that these things differ across cultures. Food, language, visual arts, dance, all those things are very clearly discernible as differences between cultures. But beneath the surface of culture, there are many aspects of our ways of being in the world that differ according to culture and that are very invisible. So it's hard to put a finger on these, and we're going to look at why this is important. We're going to ask too that as we look at why this is important, you allow the examples we share to take you out of the water. What do we mean by that? Well, a fish doesn't know it's swimming in water, and just the same way, we often don't see our own cultural ways of engaging the world until we step outside of our culture into another culture. And so without the ability to kind of take us all on a foreign exchange trip, we're going to share some examples that we ask you to just really open your minds and allow those examples to take you out of the water that is invisible to you right now. One of the ways to do that is to think about time. Edward T. Hall wrote some very fascinating books about culture. One of them is all about time and his experiences cross-culturally, his research on the area of how we handle time in culture. So high context cultures see time as something that should be slow, careful. Time doesn't belong to the self, but rather to others and to nature. And relationship is more important than being efficient. So it's more important, for example, to finish a hallway chat than arrive on time to a meeting. In a low context culture, we try to act quickly and see fast results. Time belongs to the individual. So time can be spent, saved, and wasted. Those words for time don't exist in many languages. Someone can steal your time away in a low context culture. At work, efficiency and results are more important than spending time on relationships in a low context culture. So you can see right away which context feels more natural to you, and you can see right away that we live in the United States primarily in low context work cultures, low context classroom cultures. So what feels normal and right to you, if you're from that cultural background, is going to likely mean that when you perceive a student coming from a high context culture, you are going to have negative judgments about that student's attitude toward time, efficiency, timeliness, and so forth, if that student is expressing their home culture in the classroom. And you will not know that you are making cultural judgments. You're actually likely to believe that your way of dealing with time is the right way and the best way. That's where we get into trouble. When we privilege our own cultural norms without realizing that we're doing so, that's when we get into trouble. So in a faculty and staff professional development workshop, I led a very interesting activity where we created a visual Likert scale from 1 to 5. Stand near to the window if you think you are more high context in the area of time, of temporality, and stand near to the entrance of the room if you think you're more low context. I didn't realize that this was going to be as visual as it was, but what happened was there was a very clear visual gradation on that human Likert scale that was based on people's cultural background, ethnic background, nationality, and so forth. And so we were able to engage in some very interesting conversations about how that plays out at work. Does that mean that the Mexican custodians in that line who told me that they were high context, does that mean that now when my students from Mexico come into my classroom, I can assume that they have a high context approach to time? No, not at all. That would be stereotyping. If I take what is a tendency in a culture and then I expect that tendency from an individual, I'm stereotyping. That becomes very tricky for people as they begin to learn about culture. So this visual can help. Remembering that we are all universally human, and there are some ways that we interact that are universally accepted. The world's religions promote generosity. All the world's religions promote generosity. Human beings across cultures will cry at the death of a loved one. Now, where it's okay to cry is culturally definitely different across cultures. When it's okay to cry is different across cultures, but we will cry somewhere at the death of a loved one across cultures. Individuals differ according to our personalities. So even if we are influenced by our cultural backgrounds, we may not match the tendencies in those backgrounds because of our individual differences. So looking at this helps us avoid that slippery slope into stereotyping that can happen when we start getting excited about culture. Interaction was another of Hall's categories. In a high context culture, we tend to be more indirect. We talk around the point or embellish and exaggerate, and that's considered the right way, the best way to talk with other people. Use a lot of exaggeration, use a lot of body language, a lot of emotive, changes in voice tone. Disagreement can be very personal. Message is considered an art form, a way of entertaining, not just getting across information. So in a low context culture, messages are expected to be more explicit, brief, and carried by words, not as much by body language. So that can cause a lot of confusion and judgment between people of those two different cultural contexts. Disagreement is not personal in a low context culture. Communication is meant to exchange ideas and information to reach shared goals. So very much about doing and action together. And coming up with an end product. And again, you can see if you have somebody from a high context culture and you're from a low context culture, and you haven't really been outside that culture a lot, you can just really start to see your way as the right way of being in the world and judge students as untruthful or not able to get to the point when they're writing or when they're speaking, etc., when you are interacting with them. So we need to learn as much as we can about culture so we can become aware of our biases and understand how to do a kind of both and, because we want our students to be able to work and function in low context cultures, but we also need to become a little more bicultural in our ways of operating. And there are gifts. This is really important. There are gifts in every kind of cultural background that comes into our classroom. So why learn more about culture? Well, we judge, we promote, we assign labels of good and bad, we approach, we ignore, we like and dislike, all because of unconscious cultural expectations. And this goes to expectations that are based on sex, on gender, and on other things as well. So as we become more aware of our expectations of one another, we can become able to see the gifts in different ways of being, and then more fully invite and welcome diverse voices into our classrooms. Cultural judgment at work or in the classroom leads people to feeling socially excluded. It leads people to not be given the same opportunities as others in the classroom or at school, and it can, or at work, I mean, and it can lead people to a sense that I'm lonely even when I'm with other people. This does not bode well for students bringing their full capacities into their work in our classrooms. So what are microaggressions? They are the judgments I make based on my cultural background. One of the most common is tokenism. Tokenism is when you ask a student to represent their race or their culture when they speak in the classroom. This is the one we hear most commonly as a complaint from students at Edgewood. So we're asked as faculty to really be careful not to ask students what African Americans think about X, Y, or Z if they're African American, or what do gays and lesbians think about X, Y, and Z if they've come out in the classroom, and those types of things. Who receives our attention? This is really, really important to pay attention to. If you pay close attention, which is easy to do in an online class because you can look back and see who you've given more attention to in the discussion forum, you very well may find that you have a bias showing up. You may give more attention to male students. You may give more attention to students who seem to speak closer to the way you do or to your political views and so forth. So pay attention. That whole conversation that we had in the discussion forum last week about challenge, and high support, that as teachers we want to be in this area of high student engagement where we're challenging every student, but we're also giving high levels of support to every student. We often, because of implicit bias, we differ on this. And know the Edgewood College student resources that are available as you work with your students. Look through the syllabus very carefully in this course and make sure that you look online at those different resources so that you can give your students the extra support if they need to go to the Writing Center because they haven't mastered academic English, or you need to go and connect with the Student Center for Diversity and Inclusion because something happened in your class and you're not sure how to handle it. We have a rich array of resources available. So if you know them, you can use them. The 6 steps then are: first, seek out and learn from the multiple stories out there in the world by asking students what makes the learning environment welcome or unwelcome for them. Over years, I've learned new things every single year about this. And it's been the most critical way for me to learn more about the different backgrounds of my students and what they need from me. 2, seek to continually deepen awareness of your own implicit biases and how they play out in your judgments of your students. 3, bring diverse perspectives, images, and content into your courses. Chances are you noticed that in this PowerPoint, almost all the images were of people who did not have white, very light skin. That's important. If you noticed it because so often that is not the case. Make sure that diverse perspectives are also part of your course. Consider accessibility and inclusion up front when you're designing and teaching your courses. We have excellent resources available inside of this course, and also the Center for Accessibility at Edgewood College. Grace Bando can be supportive in that way. Avoid tokenism and other microaggressions when teaching, and know the resources that are available. And enjoy the module. We look forward to learning more from you and from each other as we engage this topic together.